Given the might of the great ship, given the alliance of nations she represents, given the lessons of history and the technology of war, one hopes there are better ways of settling problems than by trial at arms. But one never knows. The attack carrier, then, moves across the single sea that rounds the world, across the route of the Spanish Armada, beyond Trafalgar, through the gates of Hercules, and into the center of the Mediterranean Sea. The very air here seems to breathe of peace. War and history itself seem far away and long ago. This tiny island, Malta, is a microcosm of European history. Phoenicians were overcome by Greeks, Greeks by Carthaginians, Carthaginians by Romans, Romans by Saracens, Saracens by Sicilians, who yielded it to the Knights of Malta. The Turks failed to capture it, but Napoleon did, only to give it up to the British. 2,200 times during World War II, German and Italian planes attacked tiny Malta, the midpoint of the embattled Mediterranean. Men, women, and children died. Homes crumbled into dust. Ships went to the bottom. The agony of Malta was matched throughout occupied Europe and Asia. The Mediterranean, as seen from the limbo of near space that makes man and all his works invisible, would seem to be a kind of nearly landlocked saltwater lake. Yet 3 continents share its coastline. It is the south of Europe, the north of Africa, the west of Asia. It has throughout all recorded human history been a battleground, not merely of nation-states, but of entire civilizations. A waterway of contention since 1000 BC. Often enough, the peoples of the Mediterranean fought for selfish and aggressive reasons. But the freedom and independence of nations has also been a recurring, persisting cause in the Mediterranean and beyond it to this day. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was created and forged in the determination of the victor nations of World War II that never again would they be weak and disunited before a strong and determined enemy, that they would stand together to defend one another against aggression. NATO's 3 Mediterranean members, Italy, Greece, and Turkey, are geographically peninsulas, but so dependent are all 3 on arms and supplies that must come by sea that they are, practically speaking, islands. To this extent, they are vulnerable to attack on the sea and from the sea. On NATO's southern flank, the Mediterranean, crowded as it is with the seagoing commerce of the world, is international water, the high seas that belong to every nation. The United States Navy's 6th Fleet is the prime naval force in the Mediterranean, unchallenged between the end of World War II and the Six-Day War of 1967. The 6th Fleet averages some 40 ships, 400 aircraft, and 21,000 men. It works closely with the fleets of Britain, Italy, Greece, and Turkey. The attack carrier is but a single ship of many ships of the many nations of NATO, the center of power at sea. It is at the same time the center of awareness, of readiness at sea. In constant touch with escorting destroyers, whose own radar and sonar keep a figurative eye and ear on the surface of the sea, on the air above, on the depths below. In constant touch with escorting submarines that search the thousands of cubic miles of water beneath the surface. In constant touch with land-based aircraft that patrol the great domain of the Mediterranean from shore to shore over more than 1 million square miles of ocean. In constant touch with its own helicopters on stations that discourage and deny any observation, approach, or attack by an enemy submarine. Even our own subs that may try for purposes of training. In constant touch with its own airborne early warning system, stationed hundreds of miles away, using its large radar to scan tremendous areas of sky and sea. In constant touch, in short, with its own task force and beyond it, aloft and ashore. Its awareness stretches then from the bottom of the sea to the stratosphere. This is the Mediterranean realm in our time. But a new force upon the waters, the Navy of the Soviet Union, is here today, perhaps here to stay. Only a short time ago, she was forced, publicly and visibly, to withdraw from Cuban soil the missiles she had established there. Their response was to build up the Soviet Navy as quickly, as effectively as possible. Thus, only 5 years after Cuba, the Soviet Union was able to show the world what she had accomplished. The new Soviet Mediterranean fleet, even to the unpracticed eye, is trim, sleek, fast, and designed for a single purpose: to confront the long-standing naval superiority of NATO in the Mediterranean. The Navy of the Soviet Union boasts nearly 1,600 fighting ships and support vessels, nearly twice the number in the United States Navy. Their ships are far newer, pack more firepower per pound, and often move faster than their American counterparts. But the Soviet fleet in the Mediterranean, dangerous as it is to the peace of the area and of the world, builds her sea power with more than fighting ships alone. In merchant shipping and oceanography, their fleet grows apace. New ships using innovative technology. Shallow water ships for the harbors of undeveloped, hopefully susceptible nations. They're offering long-term grants and credits, inflated sums for local product, excellent barter arrangements, and other economic considerations deeply imbued with Soviet political ambitions. The Soviets hoped then, through a combination of military power and political economic influence, to build a strong military, economic, and political presence. In North Africa particularly. Thus, even without a single shot fired in anger between the two great non-Mediterranean nations in the Mediterranean, the contention becomes a matter of visible, believable power. The magnet that through all history has helped men make up their minds on what side to take. To confront the new Soviet threat at sea, the free world's unique weapon is the attack carrier, a kind of summation of all that men have learned upon the sea. It serves to show how far we have come since the ancestors of this fast, tough capital ship helped to win the Pacific War a generation ago. The attack carrier is power at sea. Power the free world can bring to bear from anywhere upon the oceans of the world at any time. On this single ship, you can focus the will, the wisdom, and the purposes of the American people. The ship is an instrument of policy, not its creator.
The other northern portion of the gap, we will proceed back in towards the ship, simulating running to the ship. We will then get in.
Every mission, from reconnaissance to simulated attack, from anti-submarine warfare to routine patrol, springs from the briefing. One of perhaps 10 going on at the same time somewhere within the ship.
Overhead the ship, keeping to the port side of the ship.
At that time, they'll vector you to your cap station. The cap station will be located 090.
The briefing is a flight plan in almost infinite detail. It is the working agreement for this specific day or night, for this specific mission. No other briefing will be quite like it.
Proceed south of Crete to take up station.
Life at sea is not quaint or easy. This is a structured society, a special purpose community answerable to a chain of command, where each man on the ship knows his job and his place. Ahead of them, the mission, varying from reconnaissance and submarine hunting to training for specific target seeking in the event of shooting war, which is by no means without precedent in man's violent history. It takes trained, tough, taut men come together to create a fighting ship with all its potential for peace, protection, or poised destruction. Men interacting with technology tuned to circumstance. A place where tradition persists, where the sea enforces an ongoing respect for its power to treat everything man-made as flotsam and jetsam. Call it routine, if you will. But any airport at sea is bound to be a tight fit. Even without an enemy, the situation itself has built-in dangers of its own. The pilots, briefed to the last foreseeable detail of this particular mission, accompany their 20 tons of aircraft from a standing start to flying speed in 2 seconds flat. It's all in the daily routine, but it's somewhat too intricate and dangerous to become cliché. The flight deck, now far behind and below, for all its own inherent peril, is but the preliminary to the real thing. For now, hopefully forever, it's just training. Intricate enough, dangerous enough even in its own right. But this make-believe war is preferable to any other kind you can name. The Carrier Task Force can project the purposes of the free world across any span of ocean on the planet. More precisely, the men of the Carrier Task Force project these purposes. But men need training, persistent, repeated, sharpened training, to send the power of the great ship far above the sea, to send it over the land, to attack targets of any kind with firepower of many kinds, ranging from the conventional to the nuclear. In essence, the ship is a flexible weapons system, a spectrum of choices the attack carrier can bring to bear if a shooting war should break out yet again in man's troubled and combative history. Nothing guarantees that no one will ever dare to attack us, or that it can't happen here. Nothing man-made is infallible or invulnerable. No ship, no army, navy, or air force, no city or nation in this world of ours. The flight deck, for all its relative immensity among man-made objects, is a tiny, tossing iota within the real immensity of the sea. Perhaps, given the basic danger of taking things for granted, we've forgotten how utterly fantastic it once seemed to keep a seaborne air force flying and fighting. It will never be easy. But you don't justify it all on the grounds of difficulty, only necessity. On the whole, as W.C. Fields said, they'd rather be in Philadelphia. The attack carrier certainly is the biggest target on the sea. It may seem then to be the easiest, but don't be misled. The carrier has no fixed address, no one location where you can hope to find it, because the location is always changing. You might call this unpredictability a kind of constant variable. In essence, the carrier's whole purpose is to stand in harm's way between the alliance of free nations and its potential enemies, who must, by the nature of the carrier, puzzle out how they can eliminate it before they can plan anything drastic. Not only to attack the enemy, but to hold him off, to prevent him from attacking it. The carrier is an ever-evolving, ever-moving island of electronic instrumentation. Never closed for business, the Combat Information Center operates round the clock. It is a computerized center of tactical awareness, allowing us to know what's going on right now, how the total tactical situation is changing from second to second, permitting a full assessment of any problem and a reasonable solution. At any given moment, we know where our planes are and where other planes are. Of these, we must sort out the nature and the nationality, whether civilian or military, friendly or neutral, or potentially hostile. Airspeed, course, and altitude. Not soon, but right now. So also with surface ships within a radius of hundreds of miles. Every one of these determinations is different from one second to the next. A newcomer will emerge onto the screen even as an identified transient departs for further places beyond the scan. Beneath the surface of the sea, however, lies the greatest threat the Soviet Union poses upon the waters of the Mediterranean, as elsewhere in the world. Some 6 to 8 Soviet submarines are on constant duty in the Med. Searching out these subs, locating, identifying, and keeping track of them is a full-time operation. Anti-submarine warfare employs some of the most advanced technology of this technological age. Land-based patrol planes cover thousands of square miles every day to search hundreds of thousands of cubic miles of water. The carrier's own anti-submarine helicopters search continuously in waters closer to the ship, sometimes in concert with escorting destroyers whose sonar ears are always cupped beneath the surface. Thus, the carrier, whatever help it receives from land-based planes, is an anti-submarine force in her own right. No sub right now doesn't mean there won't be one within an hour, or next day, or next week. Anti-submarine warfare is as relentless as anything on this earth. The great ship, for all her size, is no sitting duck, no simple target. As much as the Combat Information Center is the focus of tactical awareness, the carrier's Integrated Operations Intelligence Center manages the details of strategic awareness. Each recovery brings new information back to the ship. Film will be automatically processed. Other onboard sensors and recorders will disclose more evidence. This information is memorized and translated to a language computers can use and back into data men can use. Information is constantly updated. The track of a ship, the finite study of vessels at sea, or the comings and goings of ships at ports we need to know about. Computers retain in their memories vast banks of data, constantly renewed and updated. Instantly available, the data add up to the attack carrier's memory. What's new right now? What's different today from what we've noted yesterday or last month? Ships, aircraft, submarines, land installations of all kinds. These are the very journalism of carrier operations. What potentially to attack? What potentially to be ready for? Thus, the combination of men's eyes, minds, and experience with the findings of sensitive electronic and photographic instruments adds up to awareness and readiness. At any moment, at any time. Readiness is a multitude of things to do. As they say in the British Army, there is always something yet to do. Maintenance sums up a lot of it. From the most complicated electronic equipment in man's technology to the inner workings of powerful jet engines themselves, the single word maintenance covers a multitude of imperatives. It's in the nature of things, especially systems of things, to go out of whack every now and then. You practice against the possibility of fire, for example, against the malfunctions an enemy would create on purpose. Damage control, you might say, is maintenance on the double. Maintenance of the physical ship gives way to maintenance of what you might call the spirit of the ship, the reasons behind it. People are the biggest reason of all. Their security, once and for all, from the terrible exactions of war. Their friendship, as peacetime partners in the unity of the NATO nations before the persisting dangers of our century. In a national sense, we were there to help them in a hot shooting war. We are still there, hoping with them that our presence and our power will make war much less likely in the future than it's been in the past. There is a generation now grown up to whom the memories of World War II are ancient history, or at best, the tales told by others. Perhaps most of our own youth can barely believe what happened to these nations, to these peoples, who could not defend themselves against a relentless, powerful enemy. Our presence in the Mediterranean for 2 decades has served to preserve the free use of the waterways, to assure continued Western access to NATO allies, and more particularly, to maintain the region's orderly and peaceful development. But imperfect and struggling as it often appears, the freedom that was born beneath these colonnades still needs defenders in a troubled world. On this relatively tiny sea, and on the great single sea that rounds the planet, it is the deepest hope of 20th century man that the future will be different from the past. But because we don't know, we have to be sure we are ready. Our fondest hopes for peace on Earth may not in fact be what the future will offer us. In the meantime, one thing is certain. Readiness is indeed the greatest of all possible economies. We can afford nothing less.